All right, well, we will jump the meeting off. I'm sure we'll get some people who are going to join us in progress. Hi, everyone. My name is Don Saucer. I'm the Faculty Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center. You found our way to our professional development series. Every Wednesday at noon in real time over Zoom. We also asynchronously provide these videos on our website. So this will be posted after today. So if someone says something today like, wow, my colleague's really going to know about that wonderful idea, well, then go watch the video after the fact and share that with them. You have the opportunity also to earn professional development certificate either as a graduate teaching assistantship or as a faculty or staff member. My colleagues will probably drop the link to that information in the chat as I'm speaking. You also have the opportunity, if you're a faculty member, to be a TLC fellow, which is super cool. So that's a little bit of information about who we are, why we're here, but we're going to begin with a land acknowledgement. Ashley.
Okay, let me share my screen. And hopefully sound. I'm on the wrong one, haven't I? All right, let me try it again. Desktop 2. Okay, Don, can you see what I want you to see? Perfect. Great, thank you. Here we go.
As the first land-grant institution established under the 1862 Morrill Act, we acknowledge that the state of Kansas is, historically, home to many native nations, including the Kaw, Osage, and Pawnee, among others. Furthermore, Kansas is the current home to 4 federally recognized native nations: the Prairie Band Potawatomi, the Kickapoo Tribe of Kansas, the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, and the Sac and Fox Nation Missouri in Kansas and Nebraska.
Many native nations utilized the western plains of Kansas as their hunting grounds, and others, such as the Delaware, were moved through this region during Indian removal efforts to make way for white settlers. It's important to acknowledge this, since the land that serves as the foundation of this institution was, and still is, stolen land.
We remember these truths because K-State's status as a land-grant institution is a story that exists within ongoing settler colonialism, and rests on the dispossession of indigenous peoples and nations from their lands. These truths are often invisible to many. The recognition that K-State's history begins and continues through indigenous contexts is essential.
Please remember
these truths
because we still remember.
Thank you. We're going to begin today with some pandemic nicknames. This is something we do quite a bit. It's something where, and I use this in my class, I learned from Tracy Brimhall, amazing professor of English. Your first name will be the emotion you're kind of predominantly feeling, and then your last name is the last food that you ate. We're going to do this in the form of a waterfall chat. So everybody's going to write it in, but then when I say go, everybody presses enter and it all comes in at the same time. So I'll give you about 10 more seconds. All right, everyone hit go. All right, so we've got Joy Soup. That is amazing. That is a wonderful start. We got Relaxed Protein Shake, Overwhelmed Flaxseed Chips, Stressed Pancakes, Tired Apple, Slightly Anxious but Hopeful Toasted Chips, Grumpy but Improving Pretzels. That's me. Y'all are going to improve my mood today. It's going to be a little self-maintenance on myself during today's event. Disinterested Pasta, Overwhelmed Starburst, Encouraged Chicken Sausage, Tired Sandwich, Content Coffee. Is coffee food? It can be food if you want it to be, I guess. Chill Fruit and Chill Cotton Candy and Happy Larabar. And I say cotton candy is the thing that's most surprising on that list. That person's having more fun than I am today. That is amazing. I'm glad that you're all here, and I hope that while you're here, we'll all feel a little bit, myself, less grumpy, maybe a little bit more rejuvenated, a little less tired, a little less anxious, a little less stressed as we kind of chat about teaching today together. I have a couple of topics that we'll have as a kind of our primary topic in a little bit. But before we get to some of those, I wanted to open the floor for any questions, crises, concerns, wins that people would want to share to kind of get us started. I always want to leave space for that in these teaching chats. And if you ever want to write something in the chat and have me read it for you, I can do that. So this is something I do with my students, right? I ask them things, they don't kind of respond. The follow-up is the why. So are we not putting anything in there because everything's going fine? Or are we not putting in there because we're all just can't even? What are we doing? How many of you are doing fine? All right, not many of you are saying you're doing fine. How many of you just can't even? All right, a little bit more of that one. That's okay. I think as someone said, it's week 11. These semesters are really, really long. And by the way, I don't know if this will make us feel better, but the thought came into my head, so I'll put it out there. My understanding is that next fall, we're going to go all the way to fall break, and then we come back from fall break, it'll be dead week. So we'll have that long without a fall break. So we're just getting ready for that endurance test next semester. What can we do? We'll kind of start with this. What can we do to help alleviate this burden that our students are probably feeling too, right? Because the fatigue, the overwhelm, the anxiety, the stress, what can we do to kind of improve that for us and improve that for our students? And this is not a rhetorical question. I don't ask rhetorical questions. So I'm looking for answers, and I don't have all the answers. So what can we do?
I'll say this may not help if you already have your semester planned and you're going through it, but I have learned over the course of years that fall semester is always brutal. That marathon that we do between Labor Day and Thanksgiving, this time of the semester is always tough. And so I try in my classes to plan for that and have either, like, sometimes if I'm teaching a course where there's a film that goes really well with my course content, I'll knock off a day or two of class and say, instead of going to class, you're going to watch this film and then come back and then we'll discuss it, so that at least there's that. Or try to figure out a way that maybe I'll have them just have work days in class and say, we're going to work towards our group project. You're not going to have anything that you have to prepare for class. We're not going to do anything new. You're just going to come to class and you're going to have time to work. So having like a change in the schedule so that there's something a little bit new, a little bit different, I think can be rejuvenating for the students, and is definitely necessary for me to have some days where I'm like, I'm not planning a class today. I just need to show up, or I don't even need to do that. My students are going to watch a film. So it's as much self-care as it is empathy for my students.
And those do not have to be in opposition to each other, which I think you nicely showed. Sarah says taking some time to take some deep breath. You know, in psychology, when we talk about coping, we talk about emotion-focused coping, we talk about problem-focused coping. Emotion-focused coping is you got to make sure you're ready. So you got to calm yourself down, deal with that emotion, get that anxiety and stress to a manageable level, and then you do the actual solution. So, you know, engaging in some of this self-care where we focus on our breathing and our mental clarity and our self-awareness is going to be helpful. Sarah, I see your hand.
So yeah, what I did this semester, which as I asked students for their mid-semester evaluation, they were really appreciating, was that we start our class with 2-minute deep breathing. I play like light music in the beginning of the class for 2 minutes, and it's not like mandatory for everyone. I say whoever does not want to do it, they can browse their phone, use their phone. But those who do it, and almost all of them actually are interested in doing it, and they had given me very positive feedback on doing this, and they asked me to continue as the semester goes tougher. The other thing that I have done this semester that is different, and I think students are appreciating, is that given that this time of the year most classes have a lot of demands for like finishing things and assignments, I had a heavier workload in the beginning of the semester and pushed the students to do more in the beginning. And while they compared themselves to other classes and other sections and felt like they're almost overwhelmed in the beginning of the semester, now that they are kind of ahead of other students, they feel good about where they are at without that level of stress that other students are feeling. So I think that was a good strategy for me to bring more workload in the beginning of the semester and reducing the workload in the middle of the semester.
I love that idea. Andy's doubling down on that idea in the chat as well. I think sometimes we get into the mistake of we're going to have all the points due at the end. And that's not great for our students' well-being. It is not good for our own well-being either. So definitely providing some front loading of some of that content as well as some of those points, I think is helpful. I know that when I'm building my classes, I definitely save some stuff that I'm most excited about kind of toward the end. So I'm looking forward to those last few weeks because I get to cover some of my favorite content later on in the course. And some of the stuff that's maybe not my favorite, although you never heard me say that get covered a little bit earlier when the kind of natural energy of the semester is helping me out with that content. So I really do appreciate our course schedule can do this. One of the things I'll also kind of say is I love well-being days. I schedule them into my class. One of the things, like next Tuesday in one of my classes, we'll have a well-being day. And it's next Tuesday because I found out a couple of years back that students were saying they weren't voting because they had to go to class. And I was like, well, I want lots of ways to vote, but I'll make sure my class is not the impediment. I wanted to do a well-being day anyway. So I do the well-being day and election day so that I'm not the impetus. I'm not the barrier, excuse me, to them using their civic voice. So that's something that I'll let them know.
I wanted to go off of what Sarah said also and say that I think that pedagogically speaking, having your course more front loaded, I found that for a lot of the courses I teach, it makes sense to have kind of a heavier content at the beginning and then let the second half of the semester be like, okay, now how do we apply these concepts? And so I think that that can be really useful as well. And that lends itself then to having like project days in class. You can say like, okay, we're going to learn a whole bunch of stuff. It's going to be a lot in the first half of the semester. And then we're just like, okay, now what do we do with this?
Mm-hmm. Andy, that is fantastic. Melissa, I see your hand. I'll get you just 1 second. I wanted to say that we just talked about this in my principles of college teaching class the other day, that a lot of the research on active learning shows that active learning is amazing, right? Getting the students to do things, but they have to know stuff before they can active learn. So kind of having more of that lecture and that foundational knowledge early and then following it up with the active learning, as Andy has said, is completely sound pedagogically. I love that. Melissa.
So I have kind of a laundry list of things to do. Everything from, I bring Play-Doh to class and I do tie it into the content in sneaky ways. I won't go into how I do that because we all teach different things, but you can do it with revision. It works really well for talking about pressure and perfectionism because nobody out there is a sculptor. I'll ask my class, maybe you have a sculpting major in your class, but Play-Doh can also, I just let them play with it the whole time. We do an activity with it, but it can be really nice for stress relief. I've gotten really positive feedback for students on it. And I've occasionally let them take it home. I said, you just need to bring it back next class period. But it's been a really positive thing. I meet with my students one-on-one at this point in the semester. I know if you've got a big class, that's not always possible. But you could do a quick Zoom hour or something so that it's just really fast. I try to point out to students what they're doing really well, because when they're under so much stress and anxiety, sometimes they don't get that feedback on what they're doing well, even if it's something like you are always in class, even if they're struggling. I remind them to request extensions because I allow extensions in my class, and a lot of those high achieving students are afraid to ask for them. So I really have to push them and say, it really is okay. I want you to do your best work. I would rather grade it a day later and have it be your best. We'll talk about and read about self-care and what that is and what it isn't. It's not about, eating desserts. It's about getting good sleep and stuff like that. I will ask them what they need because it might vary from student to student, what it is they need at this point in the semester. And sometimes I might have a stressful week and they're doing okay, or another week might be opposite. Sometimes I let them set their own deadlines for an assignment within a time range because I know they have 10 other things going on. So I'll say within these 3 or 4 days, tell me when you're going to do, and then they at least have a deadline to meet. And then sometimes I'll give an assignment that's lower stakes where I'll say, if you do this and you meet minimum expectations, you get full credit. It just takes off that pressure to be really high performance all the time.
Thank you, Melissa. That's a lot of very practical and actionable things. Love that. Thank you. Anyone else have something that they would like to add for what we can do to help us or our students at this, what I call the grumpy time of the semester? All right. Well, I have a couple things I want to talk about. For those of you who have been to our teaching chats before this year or last year, we always have the opportunity to kind of free-form conversation. This year, and this was something that was kind of suggested to us, have kind of a primary topic that we could kind of, bat around a little bit. And kind of our primary topic today are kind of ways to improve your teaching. And we kind of give an example like as from peer observation. So basically how to get information kind of about your teaching so that you can improve it. And this will actually set up some of our conversation next week, because our conversation next week is TVALs 101. So I'm actually going to give a presentation about what TVALs are here at K-State, what their importance is, how they should and should not be used, what they are and are not. And we'll talk about some of that next week. So yes, we can use student evaluations to improve our teaching, but that's not the conversation for today. So I'm looking for other ways that we can kind of do this. And like I said, the couple that I was kind of thinking of first was watching yourself teach. So doing a recording of yourself teaching and then reviewing the tape. How many of y'all have done this? Only a couple of us raising our hands. And it's funny, those of us who raised our hands, we didn't smile genuinely when we did that. We might have had a facetious smile on our face, but we didn't smile genuinely when we did that. Why is watching yourself teach such a traumatic experience?
I just don't particularly care to watch myself video ever. So watching myself is it's unpleasant. I do think it's very useful. I strongly encourage it as a teaching, like a reflective practice and technique. It can be really useful, but I prefer to have my peers observe me and get their comments rather than have to watch myself.
And we're going to talk about peer observation in a little bit. I actually have the different kind of, I think watching myself teach is a lot less traumatic than having a peer watch myself teach, because, I might be my own harshest critic, but at least I'm not going to be socially awkward with myself. So that's kind of my thinking on that. But what makes it awkward to watch yourself do stuff, Brandon?
I'm going to go a little contrary. I don't think it should feel awkward. I have it built into my routine, like, because of the classes I teach, I watch that lecture from last semester usually the same day, a couple hours before I teach it. And I watch it 2x speed, so it only takes me 20-25 minutes. It gives me a quick refresher on here's what I want to cover in today's lecture. It also lets me remember, like, yeah, that didn't go that well. I need to do it a little bit different this time. And so it's just natural. It's like I'm always every day, like right now I'm trying to figure out how I can get my watch in before 1:30 because I need to watch what I'm going to teach at 1:30. But yeah, don't be afraid of it. I think it's really helpful.
And it's funny, when I said what makes it traumatic, Brandon's face at that point when I said that led me to believe he was going to offer the counterpoint. So I appreciate that, Brandon. Someone said they focus too much on their mannerisms rather than on their teaching when they watch themselves. But they bet they get better if they practiced. I found I do this a lot too. I don't do it maybe as often as Brandon does, but I do it regularly. And often what I'll do is I'll have a recording playing in the background while I'm answering emails or something like that, where I'm kind of thinking through, how did that conversation go? How did I set up the example? How did I deal with the students' questions? Was I bringing enough energy and engagement? Those kind of things I'll kind of spot check for myself. But with practice, I found I've desensitized to it. Early on, it was really easy to get caught up in some little thing, to get caught up in our placeholders, right? Whether it's or whatever that happens to be. We're doing this in my principal's college teaching class right now, where my students are videoing themselves teach. They watch the video, and then we meet with them after having done some peer observations. And it's funny because one of my students was like, we're going to have, a drinking game where every time they take their glasses on and off, we have to take a drink. And I watched their video. I never noticed them ever take their glasses on and off. It was so like not a thing for me in watching them. It seemed, completely natural. But for them, that was their pet peeve, was seeing those glasses come on and off. So those kinds of things are going to stick out to us more when we're watching ourselves. But yeah, I think there's a lot of value in kind of seeing it. I also find sometimes when I look back and say, I didn't do a real good job with that content, something I could have done more. I might be right, but I wasn't as far off as I thought I was. I think I was, kind of exaggerating the my teaching badness, kind of in that moment that next day. So I think having that tape to review and say, all right, well, actually, I did make a pretty good connection there. I was clear. Maybe I didn't hit it with my A+ game, but I felt like I was pretty good with that. Melissa's mentioned in the comments that she thinks that some groups, women, for example, plenty of others, have been through so much judgment about expectations about appearances that it's not defining the position from the outside, even if we know better. Yeah, it's interesting. Like appearance stuff, like we don't want to think that it matters, but it does, and those kind of things are gonna stick out to us. I remember when I watched myself teep, I remember having more hair, and those kinds of things, and that's not the most fun realization when we kind of see ourselves in those ways, but I do think there is value even if it's not completely comfortable. Andy, I see your hand.
One thing that I have not done, but that I would like to do, is that I would like to have a recording from like behind me, or not like focused on me, but in the room, because I actually find student reactions more useful to me. And a lot of times when I'm teaching, like those are the notes that I take after class, is how students are responding when I'm talking. That I'll be like, oh, I'm noticing, like I'm starting to get like those bored eyes where they're like starting to drift off, and I'm like, okay, what can I do? Like I noticed that this at this point is where I start losing students' interest. What can I do to get them engaged? What can I do at that point to have them take some control over their learning rather than have them listening to me? And so I think I would like to have more of that information, rather than, because like Melissa had mentioned, and we're talking here, I really tend to get focused on the way that I touched my hair, the way that I moved across the room, the way, and I get too hyper focused on that, and I lose focus on my teaching. But seeing the students, that is what really gets my attention, of like, oh, the students are not focused here. And like, oh, they're really getting engaged when we talk about this. So how can I maximize that more? So that's really what I would want more from like a recording standpoint, is kind of to have it be more of the whole class and less of just like focused on me.
So have you ever done that?
No, that's what I was saying.
Okay.
I would really like to. I have not done this, but I keep a teaching journal, which is another excellent recommendation. And I will take notes because I pay attention to how the students are reacting in class. And so I'll take notes of the points where students kind of started losing interest, or things that got them really excited, especially if it's something that I didn't expect them to get really excited about. They'll be like, oh, wow, okay, they were more interested in this than I expected them to be. Kind of taking notes like that to help me think about what I could do in the future. So I think that having a recording of what my students were reacting to would be, I think, more beneficial to me, because I could still hear myself. And so I can focus on like what was I saying? How do I sound? I think that if I was not visually in the picture, it would help me to focus more on the teaching part of it.
It's interesting. I mean, in a perfect world, I'd love both information, because I want to see what I'm doing. I want to see what could I be doing differently and those kind of things. But you're right, looking at the effects on your students is going to be very powerful, and seeing how that's coming off to them. Yeah, that's an interesting point. I hadn't considered that point before, so I really appreciate you kind of expanding my thought on that. When we're recording teaching, and I'm not 100% sure what Kansas law is and all of that kind of stuff, right? I like to think, I'm letting them know I'm doing a Zoom recording, for these reasons, for only the course use. That's probably going to be okay. But if you are going to, record your students like that, probably do want to let them know a little bit, and let them know how you're not going to be using that information kind of moving forward. I'm not general counsel, so I don't know what the, actual rules are, those kind of things, but just, protect yourself a little bit. And yes, Melissa, I need a drone to kind of record this. So I'll have my 12-year-old electronics proficient son come in, and he'll do the recordings for me, and he'll do all the awesome things. And they're better at video editing than I am, so they could really make that thing look good after for me to review it. So that would be fun. I will say that I have a little bit of a negative association, at least at first, with reviewing the tape, because I played football in high school and college, and tape days on Mondays were not fun days, where you'd kind of come in and coach would be yelling saucy or make the block. and I didn't make the block, and they'd rewind it and yell even louder, make the damn block. But like, well, I'm not, no matter how many times you record that, I'm not going to do anything different. But they didn't seem to realize that. I think if they yelled loud enough, they would actually change my behavior on that. So I think there are, some of those, let's review the tape for positive purposes in these kind of situations. And Andy said, to be too scared to let my 13-year-old into my class with electronics. Yeah, that's maybe get my daughter to do it. She might be a little bit more mature than Liam, so that might be fun. The other one, and people are kind of showing a preference for this, and this one I really like, is peer observation. And peer observation, I think, is a super, super powerful tool. There's wonderful things about it. I think there's some things you can make sure that it's going to be as productive as you want it to be. I think thinking about who you want to have come in and those kind of things. Peer evaluation is also something that you can put as part of a teaching portfolio to demonstrate your teaching effectiveness or excellence for promotion, tenure, merit evaluation, or a teaching award or something like that. So there are good products that can potentially come from this. But what are some of the resistances that people have to peer observation? Because I know if I went to my department right now and said, hey, guess what? We're going to do peer observations, and that's going to be part of our evaluation processes, that would not go over well. What are some of the resistances that people have to peer observation? So Melissa put one of the big ones in there, right? Imposter phenomenon, that we're going to be found out, right? That maybe we're not doing as well as we hoped we would be. What else?
There's this idea that it's like an exam, right? Like that we're being judged, and I don't know, there's this like exam quality to it, that they're going to be like, gotcha, I knew you weren't, which goes along with Melissa's comment. But I think that that's something that there's this like idea that the person who's observing you is not doing so in good faith, but doing so to catch you.
Right. So that malicious intent, that fear of judgment, as Carolyn says, rather than, as Suzanne says, the improvement kind of side of it. It's not a high stakes evaluation. It's something that'll help you improve. Sarah, I saw your hand a little bit ago.
Yeah, I was recommended to do it this semester, and I guess you remember maybe last year I asked you about the program that you used to have about peer evaluation. And I learned that there's no longer such thing. So I had to find people myself. And since I was recommended that I invite people who don't know me from other colleges, I had really hard time just reaching out to people who don't know me and ask them for taking the time to sit in my class. But I overcome it, and I did it this semester. I haven't received their responses yet, but I'm in AP design, and I invited someone from engineering and someone from agriculture to come to sit in my class. And when I was writing that email, which I was really hesitant to do it because I felt like they don't know me, why they should even accept to spend time and come to my class. And I was expecting that neither of them would say yes, but to my surprise, both of them said, yes, we can come. And they came, and I felt like, okay, so my hesitation about like reaching out to people who don't know me is not that hard. And it's not like always I would receive negative response. So it was really a positive experience for me.
Awesome. Andy's dropping some resources into the chat about an article to kind of check out. Let's kind of start. Let's say you want to do this, and I'll actually discuss very, very briefly the program that Sarah mentioned that we no longer have at the Teaching and Learning Center. We used to have a program called the Peer Review of College Teaching. And what would happen is you'd be paired with a partner. Sometimes there'd be a junior member and a senior member. So someone who'd been doing a little more, someone who's a little newer. You'd be paired with a partner over the course of an entire academic year. You would do multiple observations, multiple debriefings to kind of provide, some extensive feedback to kind of see how that feedback was incorporated, how change occurred, those kind of things. And it was actually the most expensive program that the TLC ran. And it actually serviced the fewest number of people of all of our programs. So when budget cuts came, it was the first to go. It was the most expensive thing that served the fewest people is the first thing to go. So the peer review of college teaching actually never happened on my watch at the Teaching and Learning Center. It went real quick. But we used to have kind of a thing for this, and people would apply and be recommended and those kinds of things. If, though, you didn't have a program like this that's going to help you make the connection who do you ask to come teach? To watch you teach? Who do you ask to come watch you teach? Who do you ask to be your peer observer? And I'm not looking for a name. I'm looking for like what are the attributes? What are the qualities? What's the relationship that you would kind of leverage to have that person come?
So for me, when I was thinking of reaching out to people, I was thinking maybe if I focus on assistant professors like me who are also in the process of learning, might be helpful to me to get insight from those who are at kind of the same level, but in a different field. And those who don't know about the content of my teaching, and those who focus more on how I behave in class and what kind of approaches I take rather than the content that I'm teaching. These were the two things that I was considering.
Okay. Those are cool. I like you're kind of looking for the actual peer, kind of in that situation, just from another discipline. Nathan said in the chat, he would ask the chair. Brandon talks about someone you trust and respect and you believe is a good instructor or who knows what good instruction and learning should look like. One of the things that I would recommend is when you're looking for someone, and Noah said someone who shares similar teaching values and you trust with your well-being, I think that those two elements would be important for me. Number one, I want it to be someone who teaches well. I'm going to ask the best teacher that I can to come in and watch me, because I've seen people, do some things. I've done a lot of observations of my students, my classes and things like that. And I'll be like, this thing you're doing, I'm kind of wondering what's going on here. I don't think it's working for your students. And they say, oh, I was told I need to do that. By someone who came in to watch my class previously. Like, well, I don't know why. Like, one of the specific advice is someone said you should never come out from behind the podium. You should hold on to it if necessary, because you are a professor and professors teach from the podium. And this is very antithetical to my way of thinking about what excellent teaching would look like. But someone told them that, from a peer observation. So I'd make sure, as a couple of my colleagues are saying, that you got someone with good teaching credentials who probably thinks similarly to the teaching and learning endeavor as you do. But then there's that trust issue, because after you do the observation, there's going to be a debrief. And you want that person to be constructive, but also tell you the things you need to hear. So it's one of those things where if I'm doing something that's not working, I got to have that peer observer be willing to say, hey, that's not working. How about we try this other thing instead? Or why do you think that's not working? We kind of work it through. But I don't want the person to go and do my peer observation and just say, that was good. That doesn't help me at all. It doesn't tell me what was good. It doesn't tell me what I could be improving. It doesn't tell me what I could be expanding on. And I got stuff going on in the chat. I got Andy's hand up too. So Andy, I'll go to your hand.
There we go. I just want to say, so the article that I dropped in the chat, it's just 3 pages, but it focuses on what are the reasons for observing someone. And it gives that there's 3 main reasons: that to teach, to learn, and to evaluate, from both the observer and the observee's perspective. And so I think that that's a really good mentality. One of the things that I've done is I've shared that article with people who are going to be observed and say, like, this is how I observe, this is how I approach it. That article also recommends having, instead of a debrief after, you may have a debrief after, but to have a pre-meeting beforehand, so you can say, these are what my goals are in teaching. This is how I've designed it. I find this particularly useful because I observe a lot of grad student teachers, and so I can sit down with them and identify potential problems in the teaching with the lesson beforehand. And so then what I'm observing is more the implementation rather than the content. I've had an opportunity, rather than in the debrief say, oh, you should have done this differently, I can catch some of those things beforehand. And so it can be really useful to have that conversation, I think, with peers as well, to say, like, these are my goals, this is what I'm trying to do. And get a little bit of feedback before you even go into the classroom. And then with the debrief, I write up my thoughts in an email, and I say, if you want to talk about this face-to-face, I'm more than happy to. Most of the time after the observation, once they read my feedback, they're like, yeah, no, I'm good. Everything makes sense. We don't need to have like a face-to-face. So that's just an idea, is having, instead of necessarily like the debriefing meeting, to focus more on like before the observation.
Mhm. So one of the things I've opened this article and I'm looking real quickly at it, they give you some of the things to kind of look for. And I think one of the things that's important to do with a peer observer is to kind of let them know what you're interested in them looking for. So having this kind of pre-meeting and say, this is what I want you to pay attention to when I'm teaching. And then, you know, if the person has some experience themselves, there might be things they're going to look for that you didn't even cue them to. When I do a peer observation, I take these free form, free associative notes the entire time that I'm there. I start typing pretty much as soon as I sit down. I end typing, you know, after the last student has kind of left the class. And if I'm observing a 50-minute class, I might have 5, 6 single space pages of notes that I've kind of done, because without having seen that person's class before, I don't know what is important yet. So it's really just my moment to moment experience of kind of sitting in that class. What I find is it then becomes really easy for us to kind of point at moments, you know, that, you know, this was really particularly good. The person says, well, what do you mean by that? Looking at the notes, we can figure out pretty clearly, you know, what that content point was with this. So this helps me. I also find, though, and this is kind of the silver lining on some of this, that often becomes the first draft of a letter of recommendation for that person. A lot of the people that I peer observe are graduate students who are going to go out and try to find, you know, jobs or apply for teaching awards and those kind of things. So these free-form notes gets polished up a little bit and often become letters of recommendation. And understand, if any of you have me as your peer observer, I'm going to take out a lot of the stuff that will make you look less good, you know, for that job going forward in those notes. And I'll focus on your potential and positives and all of those kind of things when we do this. But I find that every time we do this, and we're doing it right now, we do this in all the students and principals of college teaching, the students come in and they're terrified to go over these peer observations. And I have this preamble that we go over and I say, you know, we're doing this because we know this is going to help you out. We're doing this from a place of caring. We're doing this to improve. This is a formative, not a summative assessment, you know, all of these kinds of things. And you just see them steel themselves to kind of get that feedback from us. So I'm wondering what it is that we can do to provide some of the feedback that doesn't arouse this kind of potential resistance or anxiety kind of coming from it. And I've been doing this a long time. They still get nervous. So I don't have necessarily the answer to make that happen. Maybe the anxiety is something we can't get around, but what can we do to make this a more comfortable situation for everyone involved? And if I have to, I'll point at Noah and Ash because they're TLC staff. I don't cold call people necessarily, but they have paid positions in the TLC and they've been involved in courses that do these demos. So if no one responds, then Noah and Ashley will be up to provide their thoughts. All right, Noah or Ashley, who would like to chime in? So and I'll broaden the question a little bit. So I am interested in how it is that we're going to make this experience more comfortable for people, but I'm also kind of interested in your experiences and having been through this. And
Yeah,
Suzanne chimed in the chat that in K-12 education, the teachers know the criteria before an observation. I think that's helpful when you know the rubric.
I think that one thing that we do that does work well in making it a more kind of comfortable, positive experience for students is we always do it in pairs. So students are never going to be alone coming to meet with Dawn and I to talk about their demo. They always have a partner who's going through this with them. They get to hear their feedback and then we provide it to them. So I think that is a huge thing to kind of their safety in numbers. And I think that is one thing that is helpful. I also think that we really focus on a lot of the positive reinforcement. So talk about things that they're doing well, be very specific about things that they're going well. And I love finding things that are very idiosyncratic to them. So if they have a little bit of professional experience from the field that they're bringing into their classes, I really want to play that up. Or if they have a really kind of a cool way of displaying their personality in their teaching, I want to bring that up. Things that you wouldn't just say to everyone, making that more specific, I think is more meaningful. And ideally kind of encourages them to be more open to these kinds of things going forward. I think being honest about how you yourself have kind of grown as an instructor. I really, really like to talk to students about, you know, just a couple of years ago, I was in your exact position. I was in that class. Me and Melissa were in the same class together, actually. And I feel like I've grown so much in my teaching since then, and to kind of share some of my experiences and level with them, I think I found is helpful in kind of making it a more positive experience.
Yeah, I think, Noah, offered a lot of great recommendations. And I think another thing is framing things constructively. So if things aren't going as well, not just saying that point blank, but offering suggestions for how to improve. And that might be easier to do when you're more of a content matter expert, and you know what they're teaching about. But yeah, I think framing things constructively and making that the actual environment of the debriefing safe and comfortable and more casual, and ultimately focusing on the growth mindset, like Noah mentioned.
I appreciate those contributions. Thank you. I think one of the things that our students will often tell us too, and the students that we demo, that we have do the demos in the class, number one, most of them don't have a lot of teaching experience. So this is a relatively new experience for them, which is obviously going to raise the anxiety. But a lot of them, even if they have a little bit of experience, they've almost never been recorded. And the recording aspect does raise, and that's, we talked about that as the first part of this. The recording aspect also raises a little bit of their anxiety too. And, one of the things we know, like one of psychology's earliest findings, right, is when you record people doing things, they're different than when you don't record them doing those things, something called the Hawthorne effect. And it's, I think, something where if you let the person know that I'm on your team and I'm trying to make you better and you want me to help you make you better, you've got to start on that. And then, as Noah and Ashley both said, you do have to keep it constructive. So rather than saying, wow, that sucks, how did you get your job? Which is going to basically just verify that imposter phenomenon that we had talked about earlier. We've got to kind of let people know, like, hey, every class has its good moments. Every class has its less good moments. Let's capitalize on the good. Noah mentioned positive reinforcement is the best teacher, right? The stuff you're doing well is do more of that. The stuff that maybe isn't working as well, work through a solution and ask that person to debrief. Because I know a lot of times when someone points out something in my teaching, like, why did you do that? I was like, yeah, I don't know why I did that. I would never do that again. I don't know why that happened. I completely get why that was a moment that wasn't a strength of my class. How many of you have had a peer observer in your class? Okay. This is something that I tell in my my principal's college teaching class too, is lots of reasons to have someone observe your class. I've only ever had someone observe my class for the purpose of evaluating me one time in my entire career. And I taught my first class, I think, in 1998. In my entire career, I've only had one person evaluate my teaching via peer observation. And that was at the Community College of Vermont that I taught at as a graduate student. So I've taught at, 3 different Research One institutions, one community college. The community college is the only one that put an administrator in my class to make sure that I was delivering what they thought was quality education. Never had anyone peer observe me in any of those other institutions or any other point in my career. I've had lots of people observe me, but often it's not for the purpose of evaluating me. It's to learn a technique or learn how to do a peer observation or something like that. But I've always found that kind of interesting, that for whatever reason, the places that I've been have not made this part of their standard operating procedures. And Andy dropped in that R1 institutions are notorious for little caring about teaching. I think it's interesting that even ones like ours that I think does, it's just not standard practice. And I think people get very nervous. They get worried about the conflict of interest that might happen there. They might worry about the person trying to get you, as a couple of you had mentioned earlier. Melissa said, only academia can get away with this lack of actually watching people do their jobs. If we made peer observation mandatory in my department, I can think of at least one colleague who would retire before they let it happen in their class. Like, it just would never happen. They're like, this is my class. And we have professors that I know that won't let the TA come to class because they don't want even the TA to be observing what's happening in their class. Yes, and they blame it on academic freedom, as Andy said. So what I think a lot of this boils down to is teaching is a deeply fulfilling yet challenging endeavor that we care a lot about. And what happens is anything that might put at risk our ability to do that endeavor well, I think can be seen as really as threatening. And all of us have had rough days in the classroom, right? All of us had some cohorts of students we didn't jive with. All of us had classes where maybe our expertise wasn't as good as some of the other classes that we've taught. And I think that being found out, as I think Andy had said maybe earlier, maybe it was Melissa, but that being found out, I think is really the thing that becomes the impediment to peer observation. So I think if this is something you want to do, and it's something I highly recommend, just letting everyone know, this is a just between us sort of thing to help me. This isn't something you're submitting to my department head or my dean. This is something that is purely constructive because I care about giving quality education for my students. I don't know. It's something that's interesting. And I find that, Sarah talked about getting people outside their discipline to kind of come in and watch. There might be some discipline specific practices that you might have to say, well, okay, I get why you're saying that, but that wouldn't work here for this reason. So the peer observation is not a directive, right? It's not a mandated set of things that you must do. It's information. And I think it's then up to us to decide what to do with that information. And sometimes, and I tell my students this in my class all the time, and I'll say it here now, feel free to disregard any recommendation that I make, right? So if it's something that I would say, this is what I would do, or this is how I would approach that. If it doesn't work for you or your class, then don't do that thing. But I think empowering ourselves to make those choices about our teaching is important, even if we have someone we respect telling us, hey, maybe think about doing something different. Yes, Andy.
I think it can be really useful to if you ask the peer who is observing you, particularly if there's specific things that you want feedback on or that aren't going well, but also just to tell them that you want them to view your class from a student's perspective. Because, we can ask our students, I give them mid-semester evaluations. I read the T-vals at the end of the semester, but students are not great at necessarily giving you focused feedback on what they're feeling, particularly in a specific class. So to be able to say this was really useful. And that was one of the things that the first time I was peer reviewed when I was in grad school, I had my peer tell me, he said, "You're right-handed, aren't you?" And I was like, "Yeah, what does that have to do with anything?" He said, you write on the board and then you turn back to the class, but you don't make the full turn and you're missing a corner of the class that you just never look at. And as soon as he said that, I was like, "Oh, you're right." And I completely hadn't noticed, and it fully changed the way that I teach. Now I move back and forth across the class. I do not stand behind the podium. I move back and forth across the classroom, and I'm making sure that I really look around and take note of who's in the classroom, which before that I just wasn't, and I was not aware. And so getting feedback from a peer who's sitting in the class as a student, in the student's perspective, was really useful for me. He's like, your students can hide in that corner of the room. If they don't want to participate, they're going to sit right there, and they won't have to because you're not looking at them. So I think that can be useful, just thinking about what does it look like from a student's perspective, how I'm teaching. And that can also just be how well can they see the screen? Because sometimes there's glare or, there's things that we don't notice from the front of the classroom that are glaringly obvious as soon as you sit on the student side.
And I'll even say that when you talk about sitting on the student side, sometimes the peer observers will tell me, those chairs and desks suck, right? They're super uncomfortable. There's no outlets. They can't balance their laptops. And those kind of things are real distractors from a student's ability to engage and learn in your class. Melissa, you had your hand up. Yes.
Sorry, now I'm hitting 10 wrong buttons on my laptop. I was curious, Don, I know you mentioned the program that used to exist that served very few people and was very expensive. I'm wondering if TLC would be willing to simply send out a query and on their website have a page that says a list of names I would like to observe, a list of names I would like to be observed, or both. And then people can go to that list and say, oh, I want someone to observe me. Here's a name, email, and department of somebody who's willing to do this. Or people who want to be observed. I love observing people because I love learning from them as well as being observed. Hey, I can just go on this list and send an email out to this person and say, hey, I've never watched a class on, nutrition. I would love to sit in your class and learn a little bit and see, and I see you want to be observed. And I think just gathering the yes, I want to, and then the contact information might be enough. And then it could be something that people just have as a resource to do on their own that wouldn't cost a lot of time and money. I'm just curious if that something like that is even possible.
I don't know that it is or it isn't, because I think it's a good idea worth thinking about. So I've written that down and I can check on that.
Awesome, thanks.
I would say that in the 30 seconds that I've been thinking about this, I think it would probably be easier to have a list of people who were willing to observe. And then you could reach out to them and invite them, rather than have a cascade of people just sometime, like show up in your class and say, hey, I heard you wanted visitors. So we focused on a little bit on recording yourself teach, awkward, peer observation, differently awkward. What are some other ways outside of student evaluations that we can use to evaluate our teaching? Because again, we'll talk about that in a lot of depth next week, but what are other things that we can do to improve our teaching?
Teaching journals.
We have, I'm glad you mentioned that again. We had a session on this, on teaching journals a couple of years ago. It was done by Katie Linder. Unfortunately, she's not at K-State anymore. Noah Ashley, would you be able to see if we still have that video on the website? And if so, drop that in the chat. Because Katie Linder did a really nice job talking about what her teaching journal looked like. And obviously you can personalize it however you would like. But Andy, would you be willing to give just a little bit of overview of what your teaching journal looks like?
Well, my teaching journal is not actually a journal. It's a file that I keep in my folder on my laptop for each class. So whatever class I'm teaching, I have a file that's my teaching journal. And a lot of times after class, I'll just like take a few notes about things that went well, things to change for future semesters, things that I noticed that got students engaged, the things that students respond to in class. So any kind of interaction that happened in class that was noteworthy, whether it be like a success or something that went really off the rails. I just take a few minutes after class, not every class, but I try to, after most classes, just like take a few notes about things that I could do differently, or what happened, to kind of remind myself. And that helps then in future semesters, when I go back to teach a course again, I can look at that file and see, oh, this went well, which is similar to what Brandon was saying with reviewing a recording that you've done of yourself previously. You can be like, oh, that didn't go that well, that did. I just have mine in notes form so that I can kind of look and be like, oh yeah, this went really well. Oh, I remember this I needed to change because this didn't quite. Or like, sometimes I'll have notes that are like, ooh, this is starting to get out of date. Like, change this for next semester because like the students are no longer connecting with it like they used to. It gets scary how quickly things get out of date the older I get.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. But especially probably your last statement. Nathan mentions if students do poorly in a particular assessment, often having peers look and see whether or not they think the design is flawed in some way. Yeah, I think in that you're helping someone kind of evaluate your data, right? If you have students doing an assessment, you have data that suggests that maybe, if they didn't do as well as you wanted to, either the teaching wasn't successful or the assessment wasn't successful, or both of those were successful and the learning didn't just happen. It could be any one of those kind of three parts, the teaching, the learning, and the assessment, but it'll help you kind of narrow it down by having someone who can provide you a little bit of guidance on that. What else do we have as options?
One thing that I have started doing for the last few months, listening to Teaching in Higher Ed podcast, and they invite really amazing teachers to come and share their experiences, and sometimes I take notes of the things that they found helpful to find a way later how I can apply it in my class. In most cases, I haven't still been able to adjust what they did, but now I have a list of the things that are possible to think about for future.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm going to support using professional development resources as a way to kind of improve your teaching, and understanding that it's not just a PD series. We have other things that are out there. Chronicle Higher Education is a great place to find a lot of cool stuff. Anyone who's taken the Principal College Teaching with me has heard me talk about Faculty Focus, and I'll mention this here. Faculty Focus, you get a daily email every day that sends you these really short articles on stuff. The one this morning I haven't had an opportunity to read yet was about extra credit in college classes and those kind of things. Noah just dropped that link into the chat. But those are really cool ways to kind of get some ideas, going to conferences, talking to colleagues, really cool way to get ideas. And one of the things that I think makes teaching really kind of fun for me is just trying stuff. I think sometimes the coolest things that I do are be like, you know what, I'm gonna play tomorrow. I'm gonna do this thing I've never done before. I'm gonna do this example I've never done before, and let's just see how it goes. And it doesn't necessarily go right the first time, but maybe that second time, that third time, I've gotten into something that I really kind of like. And I find that sometimes really cool aspects of my class is something that one day I just said, hey, what would happen if? And it becomes a cool thing that my students will sometimes really learn a lot from. So I think kind of remembering that this job is supposed to be that fulfilling, awesome thing, and that learning is supposed to be engaging and fun, and not losing track of those is a great way to kind of make these teaching experiences better for us and the learning experiences better for our students. Yes, Andy.
Trial and error, I think, is really great and fulfilling. I personally find it very fulfilling, but can also go very wrong. But one of the things that I've found helps those go better is when I invite students in and let them know that I'm trying something different. I'm like, I don't know how this is going to go. I have this new idea. I want to see how it works. If you guys hate it, let me know. We'll never do it again. We'll pretend like it never happened. If you like it, or if you think it has potential, but with some modifications, let me know. And students are so much more willing to be like, okay, we'll play ball. They play, and then they are also very honest with whether they liked it or not. And so it can be a good way to get feedback and try something new without worrying about, like, what if I totally face plant in this activity? If you do, you go like, oh yeah, okay, now we know, don't we, class? And the students just kind of laugh with you and move on.
Yeah. No, I think that is fantastic. And especially if you've built rapport to that point and your students are ready to come in and play and have that fun with you, that is a great demonstration of authenticity, as I would call it in my peace model. All right, so we are about out of time. Before we end, though, we're going to get an exit ticket today. So I'm going to ask everyone to kind of do a waterfall thought. I want a big takeaway that you have from today. So something that you might try, something that you were surprised to learn, something you just thought was cool. I want everyone to kind of drop in a takeaway into that chat. Don't hit enter till I tell you. We'll get here in just 1 second. All right, let's drop those in. All right, so we need to be more consistent about intentional reflection, teaching journal, connecting before peer observations take place, taking notes on student reactions and attention in real time, teaching journal, talking to peers about teaching. Love the idea of focusing on student reactions with observations and recordings of class. Be open to a wide range of ways to improve my teaching. Like the idea of keeping content heavier at the start of this course and lighter toward the end, that I should be consider inviting someone to do a peer review of my teaching, formative peer evaluation for help, not formal assessment, and like the idea of building a mentor list. I'm thinking of spending most of the hour thinking about how this would work in an online environment. So those are awesome. And it's cool because an icebreaker makes me cool to teach. That's cool too. I love the takeaways because sometimes people put in something that I'd forgotten we had kind of talked about. So I get that nice review of everything at the end as well. So we are about out of time. I'll do a couple announcements. Number one, we'll have a post-event survey for this. We'll also have the information for our professional development certificate dropped in the chat as well. Next week, super excellent presentation we're going to have on TVALs 101. So I'm going to come in and talk all about TVALs. I'm going to talk about the good, the bad, how we should use them, how we shouldn't use them, all of that. So be ready to bring your questions, bring your experiences, and that will be fun. Spoiler alert, we're going to talk a little bit about what University Handbook says about TVALs in there as part of our conversation. Having said that, every Wednesday at noon on Zoom in real time. We also have these archived for asynchronous viewing later. As always, I really appreciate your participation and your attendance, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. And because of you, I am now less grumpy. So I really appreciate that. Bye, y'all.